Human beings can live their entire lives without truly seeing reality. We inherit beliefs before we are old enough to question them. We inherit identities, fears, ambitions, loyalties, desires, and expectations, and gradually build a life around them. Then something strange happens. We begin to mistake the life we have constructed for the truth of who we are. The ancients had a name for this condition, a state of spiritual sleep. Not the sleep of the body, but the sleep of perception. The greatest deception can be the one we never think to question. Ancient seekers believed that genuine knowledge demanded a transformation of the knower. That is why the deepest teachings were often hidden behind myths, symbols, paradoxes, rituals, and stories. The surface meaning could be understood by anyone. The deeper meaning revealed itself only to the person who had changed enough to recognize it. You cannot receive a deeper truth with an unchanged mind. Imagine two people standing before the same sunrise. One sees colors, the other sees a reminder of time, mortality, beauty, and the extraordinary fact that consciousness is present to witness it. The sunrise did not change, the observer did. This is the secret hidden beneath centuries of spiritual and philosophical initiation. Reality does not necessarily have to change before your experience of reality changes. The purpose of this book is to follow a much older and more challenging path, a path of examination, a path of purification, a path of awakening. Along the way, we will encounter forgotten warnings about spiritual sleep, the Gnostic idea of hidden knowledge, the philosophical ascent toward the One, the discipline of the ancient sages, and the profound wisdom contained within ancient stories about death, rebirth, desire, identity, and the nature of the self. Chapter 1. The Gnostic Path from Spiritual Sleep to Awakening. Ancient seekers often described awakening as remembering, not necessarily remembering a forgotten event, but remembering the deeper capacity to observe, question, choose, and live deliberately. The inner spark can be understood as a metaphor for that latent awareness, the part of you capable of stepping back from the machinery of habit and asking, "Is this truly how I want to live?" The ancient warning becomes uncomfortable when brought into modern life. Consider the person who wakes, reaches for a device, absorbs hundreds of opinions before breakfast, goes to work, performs familiar duties, purchases things to relieve familiar emotions, seeks approval from familiar people, and falls asleep, promising that tomorrow will be different. Then tomorrow arrives, and the pattern continues. No chains are visible. No prison walls surround him. Yet his behavior may be governed by expectation, fear, appetite, habit, and social conditioning. The Gnostic image of spiritual blindness therefore becomes a powerful psychological metaphor. We can possess enormous amounts of information while remaining strangers to our own motives. We know what everyone else is doing. We may not know why we are doing what we do. And this is where the ancient mystery becomes practical. Ask yourself, how much of your day is deliberate? How much is automatic? How often do you speak because you genuinely have something to say, rather than because silence feels uncomfortable? How often do you purchase because you need something, rather than because dissatisfaction demanded relief? How often do you pursue an ambition because it expresses your values, rather than because someone taught you that success should look a certain way? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations. The first awakening is simply noticing. Try something small today. Identify one automatic behavior you perform almost without thought. perhaps checking your phone, criticizing yourself, interrupting someone, reaching for food when anxious, or immediately filling silence with entertainment. When the impulse appears, pause for 5 seconds. Do not fight it. Observe it, then choose. That tiny interruption matters because consciousness begins where automaticity ends. The ancient seeker did not necessarily become wiser by collecting more secrets. He became wiser by becoming capable of seeing the forces operating within himself. Your habits may be old. They do not have to be your masters. And perhaps that is what the ancient language of awakening was pointing toward all along. Not escaping the world, but becoming conscious inside it. The greatest prison may have no walls. It may simply be repetition without awareness. Awakening begins when you notice yourself choosing. Chapter 2. The Ancient Hebrew Warning About Vanity. What if the things you spend your life accumulating were never designed to give you permanence? The ancient writer of Ecclesiastes asks a question that has survived thousands of years because modern civilization has still not answered it. What remains when wealth has been accumulated, accomplishments completed, reputation established, pleasures experienced, and years spent building a name? The answer is not simple despair, it is confrontation. Imagine an ancient ruler walking through his storehouses at sunset. Gold has been counted, fields have been cultivated, buildings have risen under his command, servants have carried out his wishes. His name is known beyond his own city, and yet, standing alone among everything he possesses, he realizes something terrifying. None of it can promise tomorrow. The insight of Ecclesiastes is not that achievement is worthless. It is that achievement becomes dangerous when we expect permanence from temporary things. This distinction changes everything. Money is useful, but money cannot guarantee time. Reputation matters, but reputation cannot prevent mortality. Pleasure is real, but pleasure cannot be permanently possessed. Even family, however precious, exists within the uncertainty of change. The ancient warning about vanity, therefore, reaches much deeper than materialism. It challenges our tendency to treat temporary things as though they were eternal. A person may spend 30 years building a career, only to retire and discover that the identity attached to the career has disappeared. Another may spend decades pursuing wealth, then discover that fear of losing it prevents enjoyment. Another may become obsessed with appearing young, only to realize that the years spent fighting age were years that could have been spent actually living. This is the strange, psychological trap of permanence. We know intellectually that everything changes, yet emotionally, we behave as though our current circumstances should remain forever. That contradiction creates enormous suffering. Ancient wisdom interrupts it. The Roman Stoics would later develop a similar discipline through memento mori, remembering mortality. The purpose was not to become fascinated with death, but to become less wasteful with life. Ecclesiastes carries a related insight. When you truly understand impermanence, ordinary existence becomes more precious. A meal becomes a meal rather than something to rush through. A conversation becomes an event rather than background noise. A walk becomes an opportunity rather than wasted time. The presence of someone you love becomes something to appreciate rather than something guaranteed. This is where the ancient teaching becomes strangely liberating. Suppose you knew that a particular season of your life could never be repeated. Would you experience it differently? If you knew your children would eventually leave home, would you listen differently tonight? If you knew your working years were finite, would you spend every hour worrying about advancement? If you knew your body would change, as every human body eventually does, would you spend quite so much energy despising the body you currently possess? Impermanence does not make life meaningless. It makes postponement expensive. There is another lesson hidden here. The problem is not having possessions. The problem is allowing possessions to possess the mind. The problem is not seeking achievement. The problem is demanding that achievement answer questions it was never capable of answering. The problem is not enjoying pleasure. The problem is expecting pleasure to defeat mortality. Ancient wisdom asks us to put everything in its proper place. Use wealth, enjoy beauty, build something worthwhile, love people deeply, pursue excellence. But do not worship temporary things as though they could become permanent foundations. A person who understands this may actually become more ambitious, not less, but their ambition changes. They begin building what can survive beyond applause, character, wisdom, relationships, source, meritor, and perhaps most importantly, presence. Tonight, look at one thing you are currently afraid of losing. Then ask yourself, am I appreciating it or merely trying to possess it? There is a profound difference. Possession says, this must never change. Wisdom says, because this will change, I will meet it fully while it is here. That is not pessimism, it is attention. The ancient warning about vanity ultimately points toward a richer life. Stop demanding eternity from temporary circumstances, and you may finally become capable of appreciating the temporary. Nothing temporary deserves absolute devotion. Chapter 3, Proverbs and the Architecture of Consequences. What if the most important decisions of your life are the ones you barely notice? In the tradition of Proverbs, wisdom is presented almost like an architecture. A thought influences a word influences a choice repeated becomes a habit. Habits gradually shape character, and character begins influencing the direction of an entire life. This is not a scientific psychology textbook, nor does it need to be. The ancient insight is simpler and perhaps more demanding. Small choices accumulate. Imagine an old craftsman in Jerusalem examining a wooden door he has spent months creating. A visitor sees only the finished object, beautiful, balanced, perfectly fitted. But the craftsman remembers something the visitor cannot see. Every cut mattered, every measurement mattered. One careless measurement, repeated often enough, would eventually distort the entire structure. Human character can work the same way. An impatient word may seem insignificant. One act of dishonesty may appear survivable. One evening wasted may seem harmless. One promise broken may feel like an exception. But repeated choices begin teaching the mind what is normal. The person who repeatedly postpones difficult responsibilities becomes increasingly comfortable with avoidance. The person who repeatedly speaks harshly eventually finds cruelty easier. The person who repeatedly practices patience discovers that restraint becomes less exhausting. This is why Proverbs repeatedly returns to speech, anger, greed, pride, laziness, companionship, discipline, and judgment. These subjects may seem ordinary compared with grand mystical mysteries, but perhaps that is the point. Ancient wisdom often hides its deepest teachings inside ordinary behavior. Consider the difference between two people receiving criticism. The first reacts instantly. He feels attacked, defends himself, sends an angry message, and spends the evening replaying the confrontation. The second experiences the same emotional surge but waits. He breathes. He asks, "Is there anything here I need to learn?" Nothing supernatural happened, yet something profound occurred. The second person created space between emotion and action. That space is where character develops. Modern life makes this increasingly difficult because technology rewards immediacy. A message arrives and we answer. An insult appears and we respond. An opportunity appears and we chase it. A fear appears and we obey it. The ancient wisdom of Proverbs asks us to become more deliberate. Not every thought deserves belief. Not every emotion deserves obedience. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Not every word deserves to be spoken. This is especially important as we grow older. With age comes a strange accumulation of consequences. We begin seeing how yesterday's habits became today's circumstances. Relationships have histories. Financial decisions have histories. Health habits have histories. Careers have histories. The present is rarely isolated. It carries fingerprints from the past. But this realization should not become fatalism. If repeated choices helped construct the present, repeated choices can also begin constructing something different. The person who has spent years avoiding difficult conversations can begin practicing honesty. The person who has lived reactively can begin practicing the pause. The person who has allowed fear to dictate every decision can begin taking small, courageous actions. Change rarely announces itself. It usually begins quietly. Tonight, choose one repeated behavior that no longer represents the person you want to become. Do not attempt to transform your entire life overnight. Change one repetition, one careless sentence with silence, one impulsive purchase with reflection. Replace 1 hour of distraction with something meaningful. One automatic reaction with a question. You are not merely changing behavior. You are rehearsing another identity. The ancient sages understood that destiny was not always built in heroic moments. It was built in ordinary moments repeated until they became character. So watch the small things. Your future self is being trained by today's habits. Your life is built quietly. Chapter 4. The Forgotten Wisdom of the Seven Sages. What if wisdom is not knowing more, but knowing when enough is enough? Long before modern psychology produced theories about self-control, ancient Greece produced a group of thinkers remembered as the Seven Sages. They were associated with practical maxims concerning self-knowledge, moderation, restraint, prudence, and the difficult art of governing oneself. Their wisdom was not primarily about dazzling people with intellectual brilliance. It was about avoiding unnecessary foolishness. That distinction matters. Imagine an ancient Greek marketplace at midday. Merchants are shouting, buyers are negotiating. Arguments flare over prices. News travels from one person to another. Someone hears an insult and immediately responds. Now imagine one older man standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. He hears everything, but he does not answer everything. He understands something the younger men have not yet learned. Every reaction has a price. Sometimes the price is money, sometimes reputation, sometimes trust, sometimes a relationship that took 30 years to build. The ancient Greek emphasis on moderation was not weakness. It was recognition that human beings become dangerous to themselves when appetite outruns judgment. And this lesson has become even more relevant in the modern world. Today, you can react instantly to almost anything. a text message, a political opinion, a family disagreement, a financial opportunity, a criticism, a photograph, a rumor, a frightening headline. The speed of communication creates the illusion that speed of response equals intelligence. It does not. Sometimes the wisest answer is delayed. Sometimes the strongest response is silence. Sometimes an opportunity should be examined rather than seized. Sometimes an insult should be allowed to disappear into the air. The ancient Greeks understood that self-knowledge includes recognizing your own vulnerabilities. If you know that anger makes you reckless, then wisdom requires a strategy for anger. If you know that praise makes you arrogant, then wisdom requires humility. If you know that fear makes you avoid opportunities, then wisdom requires courage. If you know that loneliness makes you accept unhealthy relationships, then wisdom requires patience. Self-knowledge is not merely saying, "This is who I am." It is saying, "I know what happens when I am under pressure." That is far more useful. There is an old philosophical principle associated with the Greek tradition. Know yourself. But knowing yourself means more than knowing your favorite foods, interests, personality type, or personal history. It means knowing your triggers, your weaknesses, your recurring excuses, your emotional habits, the situations in which you become someone you later regret being. That kind of knowledge can save decades. Consider a man approaching retirement who receives an unexpected financial opportunity. It promises quick returns and enormous rewards. He feels excitement immediately. His first impulse is to act, but instead, he waits 24 hours. He researches. He asks questions. He speaks with someone trustworthy. Perhaps he eventually proceeds. Perhaps he walks away. The important decision occurred before either outcome. He refused to let excitement make the decision for him. This is prudence, and prudence is one of the least glamorous forms of wisdom. It does not produce dramatic stories. It simply prevents unnecessary disasters. Try a simple practice today. Before responding to anything emotionally charged, create a pause. One breath, then another. Ask 3 questions. What am I feeling? What am I about to do? What might this action create tomorrow? That final question is especially powerful. Reaction lives in the present. Wisdom considers consequences. You may discover that many conflicts become smaller when given 10 seconds of silence. Many purchases become unnecessary after 24 hours. Many arguments become meaningless after one night of sleep. And many regrets begin with a sentence spoken too quickly. The ancient sages were not promising a painless life. They were offering something more realistic. A disciplined person can reduce the amount of suffering created by his own impulsiveness. That is enormous freedom. The mature mind does not need to win every argument. It does not need to answer every accusation. It does not need to chase every opportunity. It does not need to prove itself constantly. Sometimes wisdom simply watches. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it walks away. And sometimes, after observing the entire situation, it says nothing at all. That silence is not emptiness. It is judgment becoming disciplined. So the next time life provokes you, resist the demand to respond immediately. Give yourself a pause. In that small space, you may discover something ancient. You are not obligated to obey your first impulse. A pause can save a lifetime of regret. Chapter 5, The Orphic Secret, Purification Before Liberation. What if the ancient seeker was never taught that knowledge alone could save him? Imagine an initiate standing before the entrance of an old sanctuary, carrying years of questions in his mind. He has studied poetry, listened to philosophers, memorized sacred formulas, and learned the names of distant gods and hidden worlds. Yet the elder before him asks only one question: what have you learned to govern within yourself? The initiate is silent. This is the uncomfortable secret behind many ancient initiation traditions. Information was never considered the same thing as transformation. The Orphic traditions of ancient Greece developed around myths of Orpheus, purification, the soul, death, and the possibility of liberation from the repetitive conditions of ordinary existence. Their beliefs were diverse and changed across time, so they should not be reduced to one simple doctrine. But one theme repeatedly appears in the surviving evidence. The human being was understood as possessing a deeper spiritual dimension that required purification and disciplined living. The myth of Orpheus itself carries a haunting lesson. Orpheus descends into the realm of the dead to retrieve Eurydice. He is given a condition. He must walk forward without turning to look at her before they have fully emerged. He almost succeeds. Then doubt enters. He turns, and she disappears. Whether read literally, symbolically, or psychologically, the story reveals something timeless. We often destroy what we are trying to recover because we cannot tolerate uncertainty. The modern seeker faces the same temptation. You begin meditation, but you want immediate results. You read about consciousness, but you want a special identity. You discover ancient philosophy, but you want to feel that you possess knowledge others lack. You hear about inner freedom, yet remain unable to control anger, envy, compulsive distraction, or resentment. Ancient purification asks a more demanding question. What happens when knowledge enters a mind that has not learned self-mastery? It can become another weapon of the ego. A person may know 10 philosophies and still be ruled by one insult. They may speak about detachment while obsessing over reputation. They may discuss consciousness while spending every waking hour chasing stimulation. They may quote ancient sages while treating ordinary people with contempt. The contradiction is revealing. The purpose of purification was not to create a person who could speak mysteriously. It was to create someone who could live differently. This principle appears in many traditions, even when their metaphysical beliefs differ. Philosophers practice disciplines. Contemplatives practice silence. Initiates underwent preparation. Stoics trained their responses. Buddhists examined craving. The common thread was not identical theology, but a shared intuition. A deeper vision requires a stronger instrument. Your mind is that instrument, and the instrument must be trained. Think about a person approaching retirement after decades of work. Suddenly there is more free time. Yet instead of freedom, anxiety appears. Without schedules, meetings, and responsibilities, old fears become louder. The person discovers that their career was not merely their occupation. It was their identity. This is purification in an unexpectedly modern form. You discover what controls you when the distractions disappear. Perhaps it is anger. Perhaps it is approval. Perhaps it is the need to be right. Perhaps it is fear of being alone. Perhaps it is the inability to sit quietly for 10 minutes without reaching for a screen. The ancient question therefore becomes practical. Before seeking higher knowledge, choose one lower impulse to understand. Do not attempt to conquer your entire personality overnight. Watch one habit. Notice when it appears. Notice what emotion precedes it. Notice what reward follows it. Then create a small space between impulse and action. That space is where freedom begins. You do not need to become perfect before beginning inner work. You need only become honest enough to see what governs you. The Orphic lesson, stripped of unnecessary mythology, becomes remarkably simple. Do not seek liberation while refusing to examine your chains. The hidden knowledge is useless if the knower remains enslaved to every impulse. Purification is not punishment, it is preparation. And perhaps the first initiation is not learning something new. Perhaps it is becoming capable of receiving what you already know. Chapter 6. When knowledge becomes another form of ignorance. Here is a danger rarely discussed by people who become fascinated with forbidden knowledge. What if discovering hidden knowledge makes you less wise? At first, awakening can feel exhilarating. You discover Gnosticism, mystery traditions, Neoplatonism, ancient philosophy, symbolic mythology, forgotten texts. Suddenly, the ordinary world appears different. Ideas that once seemed unrelated begin connecting. You feel that you have found a hidden door. But then something subtle can happen. The search for truth becomes a search for superiority. I understand what they don't. I have awakened. I know the real secret. They are still asleep. And without noticing it, the seeker has built a new prison from the very knowledge that was supposed to free him. Historical Gnostic traditions were diverse, complex, and rooted in specific ancient religious philosophical environments. They should not be casually equated with modern internet spirituality. Yet the philosophical metaphor of gnosis, knowledge or insight associated with awakening from ignorance, offers a powerful warning for the modern mind. Knowing something does not automatically make you transformed by it. Imagine two men leaving a philosophical lecture in ancient Athens. One remembers every argument. The other remembers one sentence and changes the way he treats his family. Which one received the greater teaching? The answer is uncomfortable. The first accumulated information. The second allowed information to become character. This distinction matters enormously today because knowledge has become almost infinitely available. A person can spend years watching lectures about consciousness without ever becoming more patient. They can memorize philosophical terminology while remaining unable to apologize. They can collect books faster than they can apply a single principle. That is false initiation. The feeling of knowing becomes a substitute for the difficult work of becoming. Modern spiritual culture can intensify this problem. Words such as higher vibration, awakening, frequency, chosen, and divine knowledge can create an intoxicating identity. The language sounds elevated. The ego remains ordinary. It still wants recognition. It still compares. It still wants to win. Only now it has better vocabulary. The ego can wear sacred clothing. Consider the older person who discovers a new spiritual philosophy after years of disappointment. The teachings give meaning to suffering. That can be genuinely valuable. But then the person begins judging everyone who does not share the same worldview. Their family becomes unawakened. Their friends become low vibration. Criticism becomes negative energy. Ordinary disagreement becomes evidence of spiritual inferiority. What happened? The philosophy was supposed to reduce ego. Instead, the ego recruited the philosophy. Psychologically, this is understandable. Humans construct identities from whatever becomes important to them. If spirituality becomes important, identity can simply relocate there. The old ego says, I am successful. The new ego says, I am awakened. The costume changed, the structure remained. This is why genuine self-examination must include the possibility that you are wrong about yourself. Try a simple practice. Whenever you catch yourself thinking, I understand something others don't, pause. Do not immediately reject the thought. Do not immediately believe it either. Ask, could I be mistaken? Then ask, does this knowledge make me kinder? Does it make me more patient? Does it make me less reactive? Does it make me more willing to admit ignorance? These questions are more valuable than asking whether your beliefs sound mystical, because wisdom has a measurable direction. It moves you toward greater responsibility, humility, clarity, and compassion. Knowledge that makes you cruel has not yet become wisdom. Knowledge that makes you arrogant has become another possession. Knowledge that makes you curious enough to question yourself may finally be doing its work. The ancient seeker was not supposed to become impressive. He was supposed to become free, and freedom includes freedom from the need to feel spiritually superior. So, when you encounter a teaching claiming to reveal the secret hidden from everyone else, resist the temptation to ask only, is this powerful? Ask something harder. What kind of person will believing this make me? That question can protect you from an entire lifetime of spiritual vanity, because the final initiation may not be discovering that you are special. It may be discovering how unnecessary the need to be special really was. Chapter 7. The secret meaning of death that terrified ancient philosophers. Why did some of history's wisest people deliberately remember the one thing everyone else tried to forget? Death. To the modern mind, mortality is often treated as an interruption, a subject pushed aside until circumstances force us to confront it. But for ancient philosophers, death was not merely the end of life. It was a mirror. Stand before it long enough, and it begins asking questions that comfort usually keeps silent. The Stoics understood this with unusual clarity. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that life is temporary, not because he wanted to become gloomy, but because impermanence could restore proportion. If everything eventually passes, then perhaps the insult that consumed your afternoon does not deserve your entire evening. Perhaps the argument you replayed for 10 years has become far more expensive than it ever needed to be. Imagine an old Roman walking before dawn, surrounded by marble buildings, political ambition, merchants shouting in the streets, soldiers preparing for campaigns. He knows that emperors have fallen, armies have disappeared, and monuments eventually become ruins. Yet people continue behaving as though today's applause will last forever. That is the strange human contradiction. We know intellectually that everything changes, yet emotionally we behave as though our possessions, identities, relationships, and reputations have been promised to us permanently. Ecclesiastes explores this tension from another direction. Wealth increases, labor continues, pleasure is pursued, wisdom is accumulated, and reputation expands. But none of these can defeat impermanence. The point is not that life is meaningless. The deeper lesson is almost the opposite. Because life is temporary, it must be lived consciously. A cup of water is not worthless because it eventually empties. Its temporary nature is precisely what makes you drink it. The Orphic traditions approached mortality differently, imagining human existence through ideas of purification and the soul's destiny. Whether or not one accepts their metaphysical claims, their symbolic lesson remains psychologically powerful. Human beings can become trapped in patterns they mistake for themselves. Transformation requires examining what must be released, and Socrates, facing his own death, became one of history's great examples of philosophical composure. For him, philosophy was closely connected with preparing oneself to confront mortality rather than pretending it did not exist. Now, bring that ancient question into your own life. Suppose someone told you that you had exactly 1 year left. Would you spend it proving yourself to people you barely respect? Would you continue postponing the conversation you know you need to have? Would you remain trapped in resentment because admitting you still care feels like weakness? Would you spend every remaining season comparing your life with someone else's? Mortality has a brutal ability to expose performance. It asks what remains when applause disappears. It asks what remains when productivity slows. It asks who you are when nobody is impressed. This becomes especially important as we grow older. Youth can disguise the urgency of existence because there always seems to be another decade ahead. But age gradually removes that illusion. Retirement, the loss of familiar roles, changing relationships, physical limitations, and the deaths of people we once assumed would always be there can force a deeper question. What part of my life was actually mine? Perhaps this is why mortality can become a teacher rather than merely a threat. It teaches you to distinguish importance from noise. The ancient practice often called memento mori was not simply a reminder to fear death. It was a reminder to remember reality. You will lose things, you will change, people will leave, your body will age, your reputation will eventually disappear. And yet, knowing this can make an ordinary morning more precious. The coffee becomes more than coffee. A conversation becomes more than conversation. A walk becomes an opportunity rather than a routine. A person you love becomes someone to appreciate now rather than someday. Death can clarify what life is asking you to notice. Try a simple practice. Write down 3 things you continually postpone. Then ask, if I knew time were shorter than I assume, would I still postpone them? Do not become reckless. Do not abandon responsibility. Simply distinguish genuine responsibility from fear disguised as patience. The ancient philosophers did not contemplate death because they hated life. They contemplated death because they wanted to stop wasting it. And perhaps the deepest secret is this: mortality does not merely tell you that life ends. It tells you to begin living deliberately. Chapter 8. The Shadow Behind Spiritual Awakening. What happens when the person who escapes ordinary ignorance becomes convinced that everyone else is asleep? This is where the journey becomes dangerous. The human desire for hidden knowledge can begin innocently. We discover an unfamiliar philosophy, an ancient manuscript, a forgotten symbol, or an idea that challenges what we were taught. Suddenly, the world feels larger. That discovery can be exhilarating. But then something subtle happens. The search for truth can become a search for superiority. I know what they don't know. I can see what others cannot. I have awakened. They are asleep. And without noticing it, the seeker has constructed another prison. The walls are simply more sophisticated. Consider the figure of Socrates. He became famous, not because he claimed to possess ultimate wisdom, but because he repeatedly questioned his own certainty. His intellectual strength came partly from recognizing the limits of his knowledge. That is an uncomfortable lesson for anyone attracted to forbidden knowledge. The genuine seeker must be able to say, I may be wrong. Not occasionally, regularly. because certainty is seductive. It provides identity. It gives the mind a map. It separates us from them. And once a person believes they belong to a special category of awakened people, every piece of information can become evidence confirming the identity. This is where confirmation bias enters the story. Someone believes a hidden force controls events, so every coincidence becomes proof. Another believes they possess unusual spiritual insight, so every disagreement becomes evidence that others are spiritually immature. Someone becomes fascinated with increasingly secret information, constantly searching for the next hidden layer, the next forbidden document, the next revelation. The search never ends, and that is precisely the danger. Ancient traditions often warned against pride because knowledge without character could become destructive. Gnostic traditions, philosophical schools, mystery traditions, and contemplative paths differed profoundly in their doctrines. But the modern lesson we can responsibly draw from them is simple. Information is not transformation. You can memorize mystical vocabulary and remain impatient. You can discuss consciousness and remain cruel. You can collect ancient texts while refusing to examine your own behavior. You can speak endlessly about awakening while becoming increasingly incapable of admitting uncertainty. That is not freedom. It is identity wearing intellectual robes. There is an ancient image worth remembering. The seeker who climbs a mountain believing the summit will make him superior to everyone below, only to discover that the higher he climbs, the smaller his own certainty becomes. The mountain does not whisper, "You are special." It whispers, "Look how much remains unknown." That is humility. And humility does not mean thinking poorly of yourself. It means refusing to make yourself the center of the mystery. This matters enormously in the modern world. Algorithms can continually feed us information that confirms what we already believe. Online communities can intensify suspicion. Endless searches for hidden explanations can become psychologically addictive because every answer produces another mystery. Soon, the person is no longer seeking truth. They are seeking stimulation. There is always another secret, another theory, another hidden enemy, another level, another revelation. But wisdom sometimes does something very different. It makes you quieter, more patient, more capable of saying, "I don't know," more willing to investigate evidence that contradicts you, more compassionate toward people who see the world differently, more interested in becoming trustworthy than becoming impressive. Try a simple discipline. Whenever you encounter an extraordinary claim, ask 3 questions. What is actually being claimed? What evidence supports it? What evidence would change my mind? That third question is especially powerful. If the answer is nothing, you are no longer investigating. You are defending an identity. And if a spiritual teaching makes you more arrogant, frightened, dependent, or contemptuous of ordinary people, pause before calling it enlightenment. A genuine awakening should make perception more refined, not judgment more inflated. The deepest wisdom may not be possessing secret answers. It may be becoming comfortable enough with mystery that you no longer need to manufacture certainty. Even awakening can become another illusion. So continue searching, but carry humility with you, because the final initiation may not be discovering that you are among the few who know. It may be discovering how much you still have to learn. Chapter 9. The Wisdom of Knowing When to Disobey. What happens when a person follows a rule for so long that they forget to ask why the rule exists. Imagine an old city at dawn. Its gates are opening, merchants are arranging their goods, and a young apprentice walks behind his teacher through the crowded streets. The apprentice has memorized hundreds of rules: what to say, what not to say, whom to trust, when to speak, when to remain silent. He believes this knowledge makes him wise. One morning, he watches his teacher break one of the rules. The apprentice is shocked. "Master, you taught me never to do that." The teacher looks at him and asks, "Do you remember why?" The young man hesitates. He remembers the command. He has forgotten the reason. That small distinction sits at the heart of ancient philosophy. There is a difference between conformity and virtue. Conformity asks, "What does everyone expect me to do?" Obedience asks, "What am I being told to do?" But genuine moral reasoning asks something more difficult. What is right and why? Aristotle understood that a good human life could not be reduced to memorizing commandments. Virtue required practice, judgment, balance, and what he called practical wisdom. The ability to recognize what a situation actually demands. This is uncomfortable because rules are easier than wisdom. Rules give us certainty. Wisdom gives us responsibility, and responsibility is heavier. A person can obey an inherited belief and still cause harm. A person can defend tradition while treating another human being without compassion. A person can become obsessed with appearing morally pure while never examining the motives behind that appearance. This is why Socratic questioning remains so powerful. Socrates repeatedly turned the question back toward the person who claimed certainty. What do you mean by justice? What do you mean by courage? What makes something good? The deeper lesson was not that morality is meaningless. It was that unexamined morality can become another form of sleep. And this matters enormously in modern life. Consider how quickly people judge one another. A political opinion, a family tradition, a cultural expectation, a workplace code, even a personal philosophy can become a badge of identity. Once morality becomes part of identity, questioning the belief can feel like attacking the self. So, the mind protects the belief, not necessarily because it is true, because it is familiar. The ancient philosopher therefore demanded something difficult. Examine yourself before condemning the world. Ask yourself where your moral convictions came from, where they reasoned, inherited, fear-based, born from experience. Perhaps they are correct. But knowing why you believe something makes your conviction stronger, not weaker. There is also another danger. When people become fascinated with awakening, they sometimes imagine that awakening means escaping morality altogether. It does not. A person who becomes less responsible, less compassionate, less honest, and more self-absorbed has not necessarily awakened. They may simply have found a sophisticated vocabulary for their impulses. True inner freedom should increase responsibility. The person who understands himself more deeply should become harder to manipulate and harder to corrupt. So take one belief you hold deeply. Don't immediately abandon it. Don't defend it either. Ask, why do I believe this? Where did it come from? What evidence supports it? What would challenge it? And what kind of person does this belief encourage me to become? That final question matters most, because morality is not merely about what you claim. It is about what your beliefs produce in your character. Obedience is not always virtue. Sometimes the most moral act is to pause, question, examine, and then choose consciously. Chapter 10. The truth every human being must eventually face. There is a question more revealing than, "What do you want?" It is, "What are you becoming?" A young person may say, "I want success." An older person may say, "I want security." Another may say, "I want peace." But Aristotle would have pushed deeper. What kind of person are your daily actions creating? Imagine an ancient craftsman working alone in a workshop. Every morning he takes the same piece of wood and makes the same small movement with his hands. One movement seems insignificant. 10 movements seem insignificant. 10,000 movements create mastery. His skill did not appear one morning as a miracle. It accumulated. Character works in much the same way. One act of patience does not make someone patient. One act of courage does not make someone courageous. One moment of honesty does not completely transform a character, but repeated choices begin creating tendencies, and tendencies become character. This was central to Aristotle's understanding of virtue. Human flourishing was not merely about possessing knowledge. It involved practicing good qualities until they became part of how one lived. This is where ancient philosophy becomes surprisingly modern. You may intend to be calm, but what happens when someone insults you? You may value family, but where does your attention go when everyone is together? You may say health matters, yet what do your repeated habits reveal? You may claim that retirement will finally give you time to live, but have you practiced living before retirement arrives? Your intentions tells one story, your habits tell another, and your habits usually speak more honestly. Your habits are quietly writing your biography. This becomes particularly important as people grow older. Professional identity can occupy decades of life. A person becomes the manager, the business owner, the teacher, the provider, the expert, the person everyone depends upon. Then one day the title disappears. The office disappears. The schedule changes. The phone becomes quieter. And suddenly a frightening question appears. Who am I when nobody needs my professional identity? This is not merely a problem of retirement. It is a problem of identity. If your entire sense of worth depended upon usefulness, what happens when your usefulness changes? If your identity depended upon achievement, what happens when achievement slows? If your self-respect depended upon recognition, what happens when recognition goes elsewhere? Aristotle's deeper philosophy offers another possibility. A human life is not valuable merely because it produces external achievements. It is valuable because of the quality of its living. Friendship, courage, temperance, wisdom, generosity, purpose, refutation. These are not trophies that can be displayed. They are ways of being. Consider an elderly craftsman who can no longer work as he once did. His hands have weakened. His workshop has become quiet. Yet the patience he developed over 50 years remains. He teaches his grandson. He listens carefully. He speaks less quickly. He no longer needs to prove himself. The outer role has diminished. The inner character has not. That is flourishing of another kind, and it reveals something modern culture often forgets. You are not the same thing as your productivity. Your profession is a role. Your reputation is a reflection. Your possessions are temporary. Your habits, however, participate in the person you are continually becoming. So the ancient question returns, not, "What have I achieved?" Not, "What do people think of me?" But, "What kind of human being are my repeated choices creating?" Look at your ordinary day. How do you speak when irritated? How do you behave when nobody is watching? What do you repeatedly postpone? What do you repeatedly consume? What emotions do you continually feed? What do you practice? Because whatever you practice, you strengthen, and whatever you strengthen becomes easier to repeat. This does not mean you are trapped by your past. The ancient idea of character was never meant to become a prison. It is an invitation. If habits helped create who you are, new habits can help create who you become. One patient response, one honest conversation, one disciplined morning, one act of generosity, one decision to stop feeding resentment, 1 hour spent learning instead of distracting yourself. Small acts appear insignificant while they are happening. Years later, they may look like destiny. So tonight, ask yourself a question that reaches beyond ambition. If I continue living exactly as I am living now, who will I become? And then ask the more powerful question, who do I want to become? And what must I practice today? Because the future does not arrive fully formed. It is rehearsed in the present. Your habits are quietly writing your biography. Chapter 11. The seeker who mistakes the ego for wisdom. What happens when a person finally discovers knowledge that feels hidden from the ordinary world? At first, there may be humility, then fascination, then quietly, something more dangerous can appear. The feeling of being special. The ancient seeker may begin saying, I understand what others cannot. The search for truth becomes a search for superiority. The door that was supposed to lead inward becomes a throne from which the seeker looks downward. There is an old philosophical lesson hidden here. The most dangerous deception does not always come from another person. Sometimes it comes from the part of ourselves that desperately wants to be important. Imagine a young student arriving at the school of a revered teacher. He has spent years studying hidden teachings, memorizing symbols, debating metaphysics, and collecting manuscripts. Eventually, he begins correcting everyone around him. He interrupts conversations. He dismisses ordinary people as asleep. He believes his vocabulary has become evidence of his wisdom. One evening, the teacher places a simple bowl before him. Tell me what you see. The student begins explaining its symbolism, its geometry, its philosophical significance, its relationship to ancient ritual. The teacher listens. Then he asks, Did you notice that it is empty? The student becomes silent. The lesson is simple. Knowledge can accumulate while perception becomes poorer. This is where the language of awakening requires extraordinary caution. Historical Gnostic traditions contained complex ideas about knowledge, ignorance, spiritual blindness, and liberation. But modern internet culture often transforms such ideas into claims of secret superiority. I possess information that ordinary people cannot understand. Those are not the same thing. A genuine philosophical tradition should make you more capable of questioning yourself, not merely more capable of questioning everyone else. Ask yourself 3 uncomfortable questions. Does this teaching make me more independent or more dependent upon the teacher? Does it tolerate disagreement, or does questioning become evidence that I am unenlightened? And perhaps most importantly, does possessing this knowledge make me more humble? If the answer is no, something has gone wrong. A person can leave one prison and construct another from gold. This is particularly relevant today because information is abundant. A person can spend years consuming lectures, podcasts, books, secret history videos, mystical theories, and supposedly forbidden revelations. The accumulation can feel like progress, but information is not transformation. You can know everything about discipline and still remain undisciplined. You can speak constantly about consciousness, while remaining unable to sit quietly with your own emotions. You can discuss ancient wisdom while treating everyone around you with contempt. The real test of knowledge is not how mysterious it sounds. It is what it does to your character. If learning about ancient philosophy makes you more patient with an aging parent, more honest with your partner, less reactive when insulted, more willing to admit uncertainty, and more responsible for your choices, then perhaps the knowledge is becoming wisdom. But if it makes you contemptuous, frightened, obsessed, or convinced of your own superiority, stop. Examine it twice. The ego is remarkably adaptable. Give it money, and it becomes materialistic. Give it power, and it becomes controlling. Give it spiritual language, and it may become mystical. The ego can disguise itself as enlightenment. So whenever you catch yourself thinking, "I know what others don't," introduce one small interruption. What if I am mistaken? That question does not destroy wisdom. It protects it. Chapter 12. The hidden danger of signs and synchronicity. Why do human beings see patterns everywhere? A number appears repeatedly. A particular animal crosses your path. You dream about someone and then receive a message from them the next morning. You think about an old friend and suddenly encounter them after 20 years. The experience can feel astonishing, and sometimes it is deeply meaningful. But meaning and causation are not the same thing. Ancient civilizations understood the world through symbols. Stars, dreams, animals, weather, omens, sacred numbers, and unusual events were woven into systems of interpretation. Symbols helped people organize uncertainty and give language to experiences they could not easily explain. Yet there is an important distinction modern seekers sometimes forget. A meaningful pattern does not automatically prove supernatural instruction. Consider an ancient traveler watching birds change direction before a storm. He may interpret the event as an omen, but the birds themselves may simply be responding to atmospheric changes. The symbol may still become meaningful to the traveler. The explanation is different. This distinction matters because the human brain is extraordinarily skilled at pattern recognition. Once we become emotionally invested in an idea, we naturally notice evidence that supports it and overlook evidence that does not. This is part of what psychologists describe through concepts such as confirmation bias and apophenia. The tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated events. Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity offers a more nuanced philosophical possibility. An event may feel meaningfully connected without conventional cause and effect explaining the connection. But even here, psychological meaning should not automatically be transformed into certainty about cosmic commands. Suppose you repeatedly see the same number during a difficult period of your life. You could ask, "What is the universe ordering me to do?" Or you could ask something more useful. "Why has this pattern become so emotionally significant to me?" The second question returns authority to you. Perhaps the number reminds you to slow down. Perhaps it has become associated with a deceased loved one. Perhaps you are searching for reassurance because uncertainty feels unbearable. The symbol can become a mirror. It does not have to become a dictator. This is where ancient wisdom and modern psychology can meet. Mythology does not need to be treated as laboratory science to remain valuable. A story about a phoenix can illuminate psychological renewal without requiring us to believe a literal bird rises from supernatural fire. A dream about a locked door can inspire reflection without proving that reality has issued a secret message. A coincidence can make you pause. It does not have to make you surrender judgment. There is a profound difference between asking, "What might this experience teach me?" and declaring, "This experience proves what I must do." The first invites reflection. The second can become dangerous. This becomes especially important when people begin making major decisions based entirely on signs, leaving relationships because of numbers, investing money because of a synchronicity, trusting strangers because of an unexplained feeling, or abandoning practical evidence because an event seems spiritually significant. Ancient wisdom at its best did not merely cultivate wonder, it cultivated discernment. So the next time something unusual happens, pause before assigning it a cosmic explanation. Ask 3 questions. What happened? What meaning am I giving it? What evidence supports that meaning? You do not need to destroy mystery. You need to hold mystery without becoming its prisoner. The stars can inspire contemplation without becoming your commander. Dreams can reveal emotional material without becoming unquestionable prophecy. Coincidences can awaken curiosity without replacing reason. That balance is the beginning of mature spirituality. Wonder becomes wisdom when reason remains awake. Chapter 13. The Ancient Path Back to the One. What if the greatest journey you ever take is not towards somewhere new? What if it is a return? Plotinus, one of the central philosophers of Neoplatonism, developed a vision of reality in which multiplicity ultimately points toward a deeper unity called the One. His philosophy is complex, and it should not be reduced to a simple self-help slogan. Yet one of its most powerful ideas can be explored symbolically. The human being becomes fragmented by living entirely among external things, yet contemplation can turn attention inward toward greater unity and coherence. Think about your own life. You have been many people: a child, a student, a spouse, a parent, a worker, a friend, a provider, perhaps a business owner, perhaps a retiree, perhaps someone beginning again after loss. Each role is real, but none of these roles contains the whole person. And when one disappears, it can feel as though part of the self has disappeared with it. This is why retirement can be psychologically difficult. The office closes, the title disappears, the daily routine vanishes. People who once called constantly become busy with their own lives, and a strange silence enters. The question is no longer, "What do I do?" It becomes, "Who am I now?" Plotinus offers a powerful metaphor for this moment. The soul's journey toward the One can be understood as a movement away from fragmentation and toward inner coherence. You do not need to accept the metaphysics literally to appreciate the psychological insight. A fragmented life is exhausting. One part of you wants security, another wants freedom, one wants recognition, another wants peace, one wants to hold on to the past, another knows the past is finished. One voice says, "Prove yourself." Another whispers, "You have nothing left to prove." Inner conflict consumes enormous energy. This is why contemplation can be transformative, not because sitting quietly magically changes the universe, but because silence allows competing voices to become visible. You begin seeing where your life contradicts itself. You say you value family, but give your attention to everything else. You say you want peace, but continually feed resentment. You say you want freedom, but remain terrified of disappointing people. You say you want a meaningful life, but spend every evening escaping into distraction. The return begins when the fragments become visible. There is an ancient story of a traveler who spends years searching for a sacred city, crossing mountains and deserts, only to discover that the journey has gradually changed his understanding of what home means. The final revelation is not that the destination was imaginary. It is that the traveler had to become capable of recognizing home. This is the deeper power of Plotinus's philosophy as metaphor. Sometimes the journey outward is necessary. You must work, love, lose, travel, feel, build, experience. But eventually, those experiences ask you to return inward and integrate what they taught you. The journey outward can become a journey home. This becomes especially meaningful after major transitions. A marriage ends, a career ends, a parent dies, children leave home, health changes, the future you imagine no longer exists. At first, this can feel like pure loss, but eventually another question may emerge. What remains when the old identity is gone? Perhaps character remains, perhaps wisdom, perhaps the capacity to love, perhaps curiosity, perhaps awareness itself, perhaps the freedom to build a life based less on expectation and more on truth. Plotinus placed great importance on beauty and contemplation. Beauty, in his philosophy, could draw the mind beyond isolated objects toward harmony and unity. You can experience a small version of this in ordinary life. A piece of music brings scattered emotions together. A sunset interrupts your thoughts. A conversation with someone you trust makes years of confusion suddenly coherent. A quiet morning reminds you that you have been living too quickly. For a moment, the fragments align. That moment is valuable, not because it proves something supernatural, but because it reveals what coherence feels like. And perhaps that is the real lesson. You do not need to escape the world to become whole. You need to stop allowing every external demand to pull you into a different version of yourself. Let your values become consistent. Let your words resemble your actions. Let your attention reflect what you claim matters. Let your past become wisdom rather than a prison. Let your future become possibility rather than anxiety. Then the ancient metaphor of returning to the One takes on a modern meaning. You are returning to the center beneath the roles, beneath the applause, beneath the fear, beneath the identity constructed from other people's expectations. The destination may not be another world. It may be a more integrated way of inhabiting this one, and perhaps that is why the oldest wisdom keeps turning the seeker inward, because after traveling through ambition, loss, knowledge, fear, desire, and identity, there is one final place to explore, the place from which you were looking all along. Chapter 14. The ancient fear of death was never really about death. Imagine standing beside someone who has spent an entire lifetime accumulating possessions, reputation, titles, victories, and accomplishments. The house is full, the shelves are crowded, the name is known, the bank account is secure. Yet suddenly, in the quiet presence of mortality, another question appears. What of all this actually belongs to me? The ancient world asked this question without the distractions we have today. They did not all agree about what happened after death. Some traditions imagined purification. Others emphasized impermanence. Stoic philosophers focused on accepting nature's order. The writers of Ecclesiastes contemplated the strange vanity of human achievement. Buddhist teachings examine the instability of everything we cling to. Their conclusions differed, but their warning often converged. Do not build your entire identity around what cannot remain. There is an old image from Greek tradition of the person who spends life accumulating possessions while forgetting to cultivate the soul. Whether we interpret such stories literally or symbolically, their psychological message is remarkably modern. A person can spend decades becoming successful while remaining strangely unprepared to become still. The problem is not wealth. The problem is believing wealth can defeat mortality. The problem is not achievement. The problem is believing achievement can make you permanent. The problem is not reputation. The problem is needing other people's memory of you to prove that your life mattered. Ecclesiastes approaches this tension with unusual honesty. Human beings work, build, gather, compete, enjoy, suffer, and eventually discover that time continues moving regardless of their plans. The insight is not simply pessimistic. In fact, it can become liberating. If everything is temporary, then perhaps ordinary moments deserve more attention. A meal with someone you love, a conversation you keep postponing, a walk you are too busy to take, a letter you have meant to write, a forgiveness you have delayed, a quiet morning when nothing impressive happens. Mortality can make these moments visible. The Stoics understood something similar through memento mori, the remembrance of death. The purpose was not to become obsessed with dying. It was to become less confused about living. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that reputation, bodily existence, possessions, and human memory are temporary. The exercise was a psychological correction. Stop treating temporary things as permanent foundations. Imagine an elderly Roman merchant who spends his life worrying about what competitors think of him. One evening, after hearing of the sudden death of someone his own age, he walks through his warehouse. The same objects that seemed so important that morning suddenly appear strangely silent. Nothing has changed, yet everything has changed. His perception has shifted. That is the power of mortality contemplation. You begin asking different questions. Why am I still carrying this resentment? Why am I postponing this conversation? Why am I sacrificing every evening to impress people whose opinions I barely respect? Why am I terrified of losing a status I never truly enjoyed? Why do I keep saying, someday? Ancient Buddhist teachings approach the same mystery differently, emphasizing impermanence. Everything condition changes. The body changes. Relationships change. Emotions change. Circumstances change. The lesson is not despair. It is non-attachment, to appreciate something without demanding that it remain forever, to love without pretending that loss is impossible, to enjoy without requiring permanence, to live without bargaining with time. And this becomes especially powerful as a person ages. Retirement may remove a professional identity. Children may leave home. Physical strength may change. Familiar friends may disappear. The mirror may gradually show a face different from the one memory expects. These experiences can feel like theft, but sometimes they reveal something more subtle. Perhaps the identity being lost was never the whole person. Perhaps beneath the occupation was a human being. Beneath the reputation was awareness. Beneath the achievements was character. Beneath the changing body was the capacity to choose how to meet each moment. This does not mean romanticizing aging or pretending loss is painless. It means refusing to let impermanence become meaningless. So try a simple practice. Tonight, ask yourself, if I knew this season of my life was temporary, what would I appreciate differently? Then ask, what am I postponing as though time were guaranteed? Write down one answer. Do not create a grand 5-year plan. Choose one conversation, one act of gratitude, one unfinished responsibility, one experience, one person. Mortality does not tell you exactly what to do. It removes some of the excuses. And perhaps that is why ancient thinkers returned to death so often. Death exposes false priorities. Chapter 15. When you no longer need to feel special. What if the final stage of inner transformation is not becoming extraordinary? What if it is becoming so grounded that you no longer need anyone to believe you are extraordinary? This idea is uncomfortable because the ego loves spiritual achievement. It wants a title. It wants secret knowledge. It wants to be chosen. It wants to say, I understand what others cannot. And so a person may abandon one identity only to construct another. The ordinary ego says, I am more successful than you. The spiritual ego says, I am more awakened than you. The costume changes, the structure remains. Ancient wisdom repeatedly warned against this trap. Socratic philosophy placed enormous value on recognizing the limits of one's knowledge. The genuinely wise person was not necessarily the person with the most impressive answers, but the one capable of recognizing what remained uncertain. Buddhist traditions warned against attachment even to spiritual attainment. If the mind becomes attached to the identity of being advanced, purified, special, or enlightened, attachment has simply changed its clothing. The Cynics challenged social status by simplifying life. The Stoics emphasized self-government over public admiration. Aristotle connected genuine excellence with practiced character rather than theatrical claims. And the mystery traditions of antiquity often placed preparation before revelation. There is a reason. Knowledge without character can become ammunition. Mysticism without humility can become narcissism. Intelligence without self-examination can become arrogance. Even spiritual language can become another mirror in which the ego admires itself. Consider an older man who has spent years reading philosophy, meditation manuals, mystical texts, and ancient traditions. He knows terminology most people have never heard. He can discuss consciousness for hours, yet his family notices something troubling. He cannot apologize. He becomes furious when challenged. He judges people who disagree with him. He constantly speaks about peace while living in conflict. What has he actually learned? Perhaps information, but not transformation. This is the distinction the final chapter must protect. Real inner development should eventually appear in ordinary behavior. How do you speak when irritated? How do you behave when nobody is watching? Can you admit that you were wrong? Can you listen without preparing a counter-argument? Can you tolerate uncertainty? Can you treat someone with dignity even when they cannot benefit you? Can you become less reactive? Can you become more patient? Can you hold knowledge without turning it into superiority? These are less glamorous questions. They are also more difficult. The ancient seeker might have imagined ascending toward some magnificent revelation, but perhaps the deeper revelation was never about becoming supernatural. It was about becoming human in a fuller sense, more conscious, more disciplined, more compassionate, more honest, more capable of seeing one's own contradictions. And this is where the phrase, forbidden knowledge, deserves reinterpretation. Perhaps the most forbidden knowledge is not a secret formula hidden inside an ancient chamber. Perhaps it is the knowledge the ego avoids because it cannot use it to become important. You are temporary. You do not control everything. You may be wrong. Other people do not exist to validate you. Your desires will change. Your body will change. Your reputation will disappear. And yet none of these truths make life meaningless. They make it precious. The final initiation, then, is strangely humble. Know yourself. Govern yourself. Simplify yourself. Observe yourself, where you can relatio what you cannot control. Continue learning. And when you discover something profound, resist the temptation to immediately make yourself profound because of it. That may be the hardest discipline of all, because the ego wants the crown. Wisdom quietly removes it, and perhaps that is why the deepest sages often sounded less like people claiming supernatural status, and more like ordinary human beings who had learned how little they truly needed to pretend. The final lesson is becoming ordinary in the deepest possible way. For centuries, the seeker has imagined the mystery school as a place hidden behind mountains, beneath ancient temples, or beyond doors guarded by silent initiates. He imagines manuscripts written in forgotten languages, symbols whose meanings were concealed from ordinary eyes, and teachers who possessed a final secret unavailable to the crowd. So he searches, he reads, he travels, he collects fragments, he learns the names of forgotten philosophers, mystery traditions, hidden doctrines, sacred symbols, and ancient schools. He begins to believe that somewhere, beyond the next book or the next revelation, there is a final piece of knowledge that will make everything suddenly clear. But imagine what happens when the seeker finally reaches the innermost chamber. There is no treasure chest, no supernatural machine, no secret command capable of bending existence to his wishes. There is only a mirror. And in that mirror, for the first time, he sees the person who has been doing the searching. That is where the real initiation begins. The cave was never merely a physical place. It was the darkness of unconscious living, the part of the mind that moves through habit without asking why. Plato's ancient image of the cave remains powerful because the prisoners do not merely lack information. They mistake appearances for reality, and modern people can do the same. A person can spend decades pursuing money without asking what money means to them. They can chase recognition without understanding why approval feels necessary. They can defend beliefs they inherited without examining them. They can consume endless information while never becoming more self-aware. The cave can have electricity. It can have internet access. It can have bookshelves filled with wisdom, and still be a cave. The first key, therefore, is awareness. Notice the thought before automatically believing it. Notice the emotion before automatically obeying it. Notice the desire before allowing it to dictate your life. Notice the fear before calling it common sense. This is not supernatural. It is more demanding than supernatural thinking because it requires honesty. The mirror represents self-knowledge. A mirror does not flatter you. It does not negotiate with you. It simply reveals. And self-knowledge works the same way. You begin seeing your impatience, your envy, your resentment, your vanity, your insecurity, your longing for recognition. You also begin seeing qualities you may have overlooked: courage, generosity, patience, loyalty, curiosity, and the ability to change. The purpose is not self-condemnation, it is accuracy. You cannot transform what you refuse to see. Then comes the flame. The ancient seeker carried a flame because darkness could not be defeated by wishing for light. In our psychological interpretation, the flame becomes disciplined attention. Attention is what allows awareness to remain present. Without attention, even profound insight disappears beneath the next distraction. You may understand something deeply in the morning and forget it completely by evening. You may recognize your anger and then become angry again. You may promise yourself that you will change and then return to the same habit. This is why ancient traditions repeatedly emphasized practice. Knowledge begins the journey. Practice changes the traveler. The key is discernment. This may be the most important lesson of all. Not every coincidence is a message. Not every dream is prophecy. Not every unusual sensation is evidence of awakening. Not every teacher deserves obedience. Not every ancient symbol contains a hidden command. Mystery can be valuable without becoming superstition. Wonder can coexist with reason. A mature seeker does not need to destroy mystery. He simply refuses to surrender his judgment to it. And eventually, the seeker discovers something uncomfortable. The final secret was never merely about knowing more. It was about becoming more responsible for what you already know. If you know that anger damages your relationships, what will you do with that knowledge? If you know that fear has been controlling your decisions, what will you do? If you know that your attention is constantly being consumed by distraction, what will you change? If you recognize that your identity has been built around approval, what happens when approval disappears? This is where philosophy stops being entertainment. It becomes life. The Stoics asked the individual to distinguish what could be governed from what could not. Aristotle asked what kind of character repeated actions were creating. The Socratic tradition demanded examination. Plotinus described the movement inward toward greater unity. Gnostic traditions used the language of awakening from forgetfulness. Hermetic thought emphasized correspondence between inner and outer realities. Buddhist philosophy repeatedly confronted impermanence, attachment, and the instability of the constructed self. These traditions differed profoundly in their metaphysics. They should not be collapsed into one identical teaching. Yet a striking philosophical thread can still be found. Do not live mechanically. Look, question, examine, practice, become conscious. And perhaps this is why the old image of initiation remains so powerful. The cave becomes awareness, the mirror becomes self-knowledge, the flame becomes discipline,